If you crave stories that pierce the veil between reality and the supernatural, where every shadow hides a secret and every wall bleeds with untold sorrow, then Bleeding Walls is your new sanctuary. Join us as we uncover haunting tales of forgotten places, lost souls, and mysteries that refuse to rest. Subscribe now to Bleeding Walls and step inside a world where every story is alive and every moment is thick with suspense. Don't miss a single chilling revelation. Become part of our community today and let the Bleeding Walls speak to you. In the quiet town of Millfield, a Dollar Tree store stood at the corner of Main and Elm, unassuming and ordinary by day, but harboring shadows and secrets when night fell. It was not just the usual, eerie quiet of an empty store after closing hours. Employees whispered about strange happenings, inexplicable noises, and an ever-present sense of being watched. The walls of that store seemed to hold memories not meant for the daylight, bleeding with the echoes of past horrors that no one dared speak of openly. Marissa had taken the night shift at this Dollar Tree out of necessity. Fresh out of college and struggling to make ends meet, she needed the job despite the growing unease she felt every time she walked through the doors after dark. From her first night on the job, there was something off, something subtle but unmistakable. The bright fluorescent lights flickered just slightly, the aisles seemed longer, and shadows clung where they shouldn't. Bills and odds and ends didn't explain the cold pit in her stomach as the clock inched past midnight. She tried to dismiss it as exhaustion or overactive imagination, but the stories she heard from former workers chilled her bones. One spoke of a man who once appeared out of nowhere, silently watching from the end of aisle 7 before vanishing when confronted. Another told of footsteps echoing in aisles that were supposed to be empty, lights dimming with no cause, and disturbing whispers carried on the stagnant air. Some nights, Marissa found the front door unlocked, despite her being the only one with keys. One particular night, the store had closed, and Marissa was completing her usual inventory check. The hum of the fluorescent bulbs above was the only sound, but then was broken by a faint rustling from the snack aisle. Thinking it was a stray rat or some fallen merchandise, she approached cautiously. As she rounded the corner, her flashlight cut through the dim, and for a moment she thought she saw it. A figure clothed in a Dollar Tree uniform standing motionless by the shelves. Her heart thudded painfully until the figure suddenly vanished like smoke. Determined not to fall prey to fear, Marissa pressed on, but tension prickled at her skin. At 2:15 a.m., the security camera feeds flickered and went black for a moment before snapping back. Reviewing the tape later confirmed her fear. A shadowy figure appeared moving unnaturally fast, blurring past, the cameras as if not bound by space or time. Intrigued and terrified, Marissa began secretly logging strange occurrences, unwilling to share for fear of disbelief or losing her job. Weeks passed, and the hauntings intensified. Marissa would hear whispered voices through the store's PA system when it was off, disembodied laughter echoing from the bathrooms, and the unsettling sound of heavy breathing just beyond reach. One night, as she locked the store alone, the metal grate guarding the entrance slammed down with a resounding bang, trapping her inside. Panic surged through her veins as she pounded on the controls, only to hear a voice, hissing and low, whisper, "You don't belong here." The climax came one chilling night when a man armed with a machete suddenly appeared inside the store late into her shift. He stood silently at the end of the aisle, eyes fixed intently on Marissa. Frozen with terror, she could only watch as he advanced, hacking furiously at the office door where she had barricaded herself. Her trembling fingers managed to call 911 as the sound of the blade met metal echoed through the store. Police arrived just in time, subduing the attacker, who was later revealed to be a man who had been stalking the store for weeks, intent on revenge for reasons no one fully understood. Even after the ordeal, Marissa's nights were far from peaceful. The walls seemed to bleed with an invisible sorrow or rage, each scratch on the floor a tattoo of the traumas carried in silence. Co-workers who returned spoke of seeing fleeting apparitions. Dollar Tree employees from long ago, caught between worlds, doomed to wander the aisles for eternity. Marissa herself often caught the faintest silhouette in the corner of her eye, the longing and desperation etched into its very form. She learned that the property's land had once been the site of violence decades earlier, a tale of desperation and broken promises that left a stain on the earth itself. Whispers suggested the spirits of those forgotten souls had merged with the place, making the store more than just a retail space but a crossroads of unresolved pain and spectral presence. Through it all, Marissa kept recording and sharing her experiences with a small group of believers and investigators. The Dollar Tree night shift was no longer just a job. It had become a battlefield between the living and those who bled memories through the walls, forever haunting the night. The story of the bleeding walls in that humble store was a testament to the fragility of safety, the weight of untold stories, and the resilience of the human spirit confronting the darkness. Working the night shift at Dollar Tree was supposed to be a simple job for Natalie. Quiet hours, stocking shelves, cleaning, and keeping the store ready for the next day's rush. The store was nearly always calm after closing time, bathed in the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of cleaning supplies. But one night, ordinary gave way to something sinister that would haunt her forever. It began like any other shift. Natalie arrived just before midnight, greeted by the familiar emptiness and the cold chill of the air-conditioned store. As she walked through the aisles arranging merchandise, she noticed a man casually browsing near the seasonal section. He wore a Dollar Tree shirt but wasn't clocked in. At first, Natalie thought it was a forgotten co-worker, but something felt off. The man's smile was too fixed, his eyes unusually cold. The man didn't say a word. He simply stood watching, unmoving, as if waiting for something. Natalie felt a knot tighten in her stomach. When she tried to approach him, the man disappeared, vanishing in the blink of an eye as if swallowed by the shadows themselves. Shaken but determined not to lose her nerve, Natalie told herself it was just a trick of the light or exhaustion. But later, while organizing the back room, she found a note slipped under the door. The paper was blank, except for a single line scrawled in shaky handwriting. "I'm still here." Her heart pounded. Whoever had written it had been close. Too close. Throughout the next few nights, the encounters escalated. The stranger appeared at odd intervals, never speaking, always watching. On one occasion, Natalie caught him standing near the bathroom entrance, his eyes fixated on the door as if guarding some secret passage. When she called out, the man didn't respond. He vanished before her eyes. Other employees started to notice strange things too. Items moving on their own, shelves rearranged, shadows flickering at the edges of the security cameras. Late one night, while conducting the final sweep before closing, Natalie heard heavy footsteps in the empty store. The sound echoed through aisles lined with colorful snacks and chipped vinyl floors, growing louder until it stopped abruptly. She spun around, expecting to see the stranger, but found no one. The building felt alive with an oppressive energy. The fluorescent lights flickered, dimming to near darkness before buzzing back to life. The store's PA system crackled, and whispers, soft but chilling, blew through the sound system, repeating the phrase, "You don't belong." On one terrifying night, after locking the doors and setting the alarms, Natalie was startled by the front gate rattling violently. Rushing to the entrance, she saw the same man pushing against the metal grate from the parking lot side, trying to force his way in. She slammed the gate shut just in time, collapsing against the door, heart racing. Panicked, Natalie called the police. When officers arrived to investigate, the parking lot was eerily empty. No sign of the man. Security footage confirmed she hadn't imagined it. The footage captured the man clearly, but as they tried to track his movements, the video glitched and the image vanished, only to reappear outside the store, standing motionless. Days later, Natalie was followed home. sensing eyes watching her from darkened cars and shadowed doorways. Strange messages appeared on her phone, from unknown numbers, taunting and cryptic. "You can't hide. We're closer than you think." Sleep fled her nights, replaced by nightmares of the store, bleeding crimson stains, walls dripping with shadowy blood, aisles stretching endlessly into darkness. Worse still, the man came inside the store during one night shift, blending among the aisles, his presence suffocating and cold. His intent was clear in the ice behind his eyes. Natalie barricaded herself in the office as he approached, the sound of his footsteps ringing louder and louder. With trembling hands, she dialed 911 just as he began pounding on the door with a machete. The police arrived moments before disaster struck, tackling the man and pulling his weapon away. His identity was a grim revelation. He was a former employee fired months earlier for theft who had grown obsessed with revenge against those he blamed for his downfall. The attack sent waves of fear through the staff, fracturing the safe veneer of the workplace forever. Even after the arrest, the haunting didn't end. Workers reported shadows lurking in aisles after hours, unexplained blood-like stains appearing faintly on the walls and floors, and the unsettling sensation of unseen eyes tracking their every move. The store itself seemed to pulse with a restless sorrow, a bleeding wound that could never fully heal. Natalie, forever changed, knew the true horror wasn't just the man's violence, but the lingering darkness that had wrapped itself around the Dollar Tree. A place once benign had become a nexus of fear, memory, and spectral anguish. The walls bore witness to nightmares and bled the spilled pain of the living and the dead. She resolved to share the story, not just as a warning, but as a memorial to the struggle between light and shadow, hope and despair. The tale of the bleeding walls in that Dollar Tree was a testament to resilience, fear, and the haunted spaces we sometimes walk unaware. Natalie's voice became a beacon for those who work the night shift in silence, confronting their own ghosts behind brightly lit aisles. The Dollar Tree store in the town of Hollow Creek had always been a quiet place during the day, a mundane stop for those needing everyday essentials. But after the sun dipped below the horizon and the doors locked tight, the store transformed into a realm of unsettling whispers and shadows that seemed to creep just beyond the reach of the harsh fluorescent lights. Employees on the night shift never spoke much about what they experienced, unwilling to invite the attention or disbelief of others. But to those who worked there, the bleeding walls were a reality they could neither explain nor escape. Jordan had recently taken the graveyard shift at this particular Dollar Tree, drawn by the steady pay and the promise of solitude. At first, the quiet seemed a relief, a calm pause in a hectic life. But as the nights wore on, an eerie sensation took hold, as though the building itself was aware of his presence, watching and waiting. It began with small, subtle things, the faint scent of iron that hung in the stale air, the ever-present hum of the lights twisted into an unsettling drone, and moments when the aisles seemed to stretch endlessly with no end. Jordan's unease deepened when strange marks appeared on the walls, dark red streaks that glistened faintly under the glow of the overhead lamps. At first, he assumed some prank or spilled paint, but the stains moved too fluidly, shifting shape like fresh wounds weeping. The more he tried to ignore them, the more they seemed to bleed, seeping not just from the cracks in the plaster, but from within the walls themselves, as if the building's bones were weeping silently. The history of the store and the land beneath it only deepened the mystery. Years before, the property had been the site of a devastating fire that claimed multiple lives during a forgotten era. The land retained its scars, and locals whispered that the souls of those lost were trapped, their anguish manifesting in the store's walls. Jordan soon discovered reports of a family who once owned the land, torn apart by greed and betrayal, their pain etched forever into the earth. One night, Jordan encountered a presence more tangible than ever before. As he restocked shelves late into his shift, he felt cold breath brush against the back of his neck. Turning sharply, he saw a shadowy figure clad in a Dollar Tree uniform standing silently at the end of the aisle. The figure's eyes gleamed with a sorrow so profound it chilled Jordan to his core. When he spoke his name, the apparition vanished, leaving behind a lingering sense of loss. Increasingly, Jordan found himself drawn into the store's dark heart. The PA system would crackle to life in the middle of the night, emitting haunting whispers that grew louder with each passing hour. The faint outlines of people, customers long gone, would flicker in the peripheral vision of the security monitors. At times, the cold spots grew so intense he could see his breath in the icy air. The effects took their toll. Jordan's sleep became fractured by dreams of running through endless aisles soaked in blood. He would wake sweating, haunted by voices begging for release. His co-workers shared similar experiences, keys disappearing inexplicably, lights flickering despite new wiring, and the persistent feeling of being watched when no one else was around. One night, the store's haunting took a violent turn. A man, resembling a former employee dismissed months earlier for theft, slipped inside during the night. Armed with a machete, he roamed the aisles with a disturbing intensity. Jordan managed to lock himself inside the security office, dialing 911 as the man hacked relentlessly at the door. Police arrived just in time to subdue the attacker, revealing a motive tangled in obsession and revenge tied to the haunted history of the store. Yet the physical threat was only part of the story. The bleeding walls continued to ooze their crimson lament, as if the store's heart was still wounded. Jordan's recordings and photos showed stains that couldn't be cleaned or painted over. Dark red fluid that reappeared like a slow pulse, echoing a pain that would not die. In the days that followed, Jordan found solace in sharing his experiences with a small community of paranormal investigators and former employees who understood the darkness. Together, they pieced together the chilling history that linked the store to generations of unresolved tragedy, and they performed rituals intended to soothe the restless spirits. Yet, even as the bleeding slowed, the store never returned to normal. It remained a place where the dead whispered through the walls and shadows moved with silent grief. Jordan's story stands as a testament to the unseen battles waged in places we least suspect. The silent hauntings that bleed through time and space, where sorrow cannot be buried and the past seeps into the present. The Dollar Tree in Hollow Creek is more than just a store. It is a living monument to pain, memory, and the fragile boundary between this world and the next. The Dollar Tree store in the small town of Glenwood had a reputation whispered quietly among locals and former employees. Known for sudden, unexplained chills and eerie happenings, it was a place where the daylight hours kept shadows at bay, but the night shift revealed something else entirely, a lingering darkness that seeped from the very walls. Employees who stayed late told stories of bleeding walls, not literal blood, but an intangible bleeding of sorrow and rage, as if the building itself carried wounds too deep to heal. This was the story of one such night, told by Sarah, a young woman who took the night shift job out of need, but found herself tangled in a nightmare from which she could not awake. Sarah was no stranger to odd work environments, but when she took the night shift at Glenwood's Dollar Tree, she anticipated quiet stock nights and little human interaction. The job was straightforward, the pay steady, and the hours suited her freelance writing schedule. But even before her first night, she heard the rumors, the tales of strange figures glimpsed in aisles, whispers in empty rooms, lights flickering in unnatural patterns, and yes, the infamous bleeding walls that no one dared explain. Her initial weeks went by with nothing more than the usual creaks and groans of an old building settling. But gradually, signs emerged that suggested the store was anything but ordinary. Red stains appeared on walls near the break room and the storage closets, streaks that would vanish by morning only to reappear later with a deeper, almost wet look. At first, Sarah thought it might be rust from damaged pipes or spilled cleaning solutions, but the stains defied explanation. They seemed to move, swelling and shrinking like wounds breathing in painful rhythm. One night, while cataloging inventory, Sarah heard the faint sound of tapping, soft, deliberate tapping coming from the back of the store. It was unlike anything mechanical. It echoed faintly, rhythmic and unsettling. Trying to locate the source, she found no cause, only the dim glow of emergency exit signs casting ghostly shadows. The sensation of being watched pressed down on her, thickening the stale air. As the nights wore on, the store's atmosphere turned heavier. The fluorescent lights above began flickering more frequently, and the temperature dropped inexplicably in certain aisles, frost seemingly forming on empty shelves despite the mandatory warmth. Sarah's dreams grew darker, filled with visions of halls, slick with blood-like liquid, and voices calling out in despair. Sleep became elusive, and exhaustion compounded her fear, trapping her between waking dread and fevered nightmares. The deeper mystery revealed itself through a secret that had been buried by time and neglect. Sarah discovered old newspaper clippings hidden behind a loose panel in the manager's office. They told of a tragic history tied to the land where Dollar Tree now stood. Decades earlier, the Thai property was home to a family ravaged by betrayal and violence. A bitter feud culminated in a horrific night when the mother was found dead under mysterious circumstances, her blood staining the floors and walls, blood that local legends said never washed away. Sarah pieced together that the store's foundation was, in a sense, built upon that lingering tragedy, a trap for restless souls whose pain seeped into the very bricks. The bleeding walls were more than a haunting. They were a scar of the past refusing to fade, bleeding sorrow and anger into the present. One night, the haunting escalated sharply. Sarah was alone, completing the final round of the store lockdown when the door unexpectedly swung open despite having been secured. A figure stood silhouetted in the night, motionless. As she approached, the figure dissolved into smoky mist, leaving behind the chilling scent of iron and cold despair. Heart racing, Sarah hurried to check the security footage. The recordings revealed strange anomalies, distorted shapes wandering the aisles, lights pulsing in unnatural patterns, and shadowy figures that appeared for fleeting moments only to vanish when cameras focused on them. More unsettling was captured audio featuring distorted breathing, whispered names, and a chilling phrase repeated over and over: "You cannot leave." The climax of Sarah's ordeal came on a night when a man entered the store with a chilling silence. He was a former employee terminated months before for theft, someone Sarah had seen lurking near the building on previous nights. Armed with a machete, he advanced through the store with cold intent. Sarah fled to the office, barricading the door as the man struck relentlessly. Her trembling hands dialed 911 as the sound of metal against wood echoed through the empty aisles. Police arrived just in time to prevent a tragedy, detaining the attacker whose mind had been overtaken not only by spite but by something darker, a resonance with the store's restless spirit. The attack shook the community, but the haunting did not end there. Staff reported shadows moving silently in the peripheral vision, faintly glowing stains appearing and disappearing on the walls, and an unshakable feeling that the building itself was alive and watching. Sarah's experience transformed her, binding her to the story of the bleeding walls. No longer just a place of work, the store was a nexus of sorrow and unresolved grief. A bleeding wound in the fabric of reality where the past bled through into the present, demanding acknowledgement. Determined to bring peace, Sarah connected with paranormal investigators, folklore experts, and local historians. Together, they conducted rituals of cleansing and remembrance, reciting sacred texts and honoring the lost souls tethered to the place. Slowly, the bleeding slowed. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the store's pulse quieted to a fragile calm. Yet the scars remained, reminding all who entered that some wounds never fully heal, and some stories bleed on endlessly. In the quiet town of Pinebridge, there was a Dollar Tree store that had long been the center of whispered rumors and unsettling tales among its employees and nearby residents. What appeared to be an ordinary discount store by day transformed into a place of dread and mystery after dark. Workers on the night shift shared stories of strange noises, fleeting shadows, and most chillingly, the walls bleeding an inexplicable crimson that stained both plaster and wood. This was the story of one such night, told through the eyes of Kara, a night shift employee whose experience changed her forever. Kara had taken the graveyard shift at Pinebridge's Dollar Tree to make ends meet while attending college. What began as a routine job soon morphed into a battle with something unseen and malevolent lurking in the empty aisles. From the moment she stepped through the doors after 11 p.m., Kara felt an oppressive weight in the air, an almost tangible sadness and anger that clung to the store like a chilling fog. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead seemed harsh and unnatural, amplifying the store's eerie silence. On her second week, Kara first noticed the strange marks. Dark stains trickling down the breaks in the drywall, glistening under the dim night lights. At first, she thought it was spilled paint or an ill-fated plumbing leak, but attempts to clean or cover the stains proved futile. The crimson seeped through paint and plaster alike, a slow, rhythmic dripping that stained the floor beneath. What disturbed Kara most was the sensation that the walls were alive, pulsing softly as if breathing a slow, sorrowful heartbeat. One late evening, while organizing the back stock room, Kara stumbled upon a hidden room she hadn't been told about, a cramped storage closet tucked behind false panels. Inside, she found old newspaper clippings and faded photographs, revealing a tragic history connected to the land on which the store was built. Decades earlier, a family named the Harrows lived there. The patriarch, Thomas Harrow, was a stern man, rumored to have been involved in violent disputes within the community. The family was torn apart by a dreadful fire that claimed the lives of his wife and daughter under mysterious circumstances. The house was razed, but locals swore that the ground where it once stood remained cursed, bleeding grief and rage into everything built over it. Kara's nights grew more unsettling as the bleeding intensified. Whispers seemed to echo faintly from the walls, words lost in the rattle of old pipes but unmistakably human. Shelves shifted, products fell without cause, and shadows flitted just beyond her line of sight. She often caught glimpses of figures dressed in faded green uniforms, seemingly trapped in an endless loop between aisles. Ghostly reflections of past employees, or perhaps spectral remnants of lost souls cursed to wander. On a particularly harrowing night close to Halloween, Kara was completing her closing duties when the main lights suddenly flickered and died. Plunged into near darkness lit only by security LEDs, she heard a steady drip, drip, drip coming from the front of the store. Following the sound, Kara found crimson liquid bleeding through the cracks around the main entrance door, pooling on the floor like blood spilled in slow motion. The metallic scent was overwhelming and oppressive. Heart pounding, Kara locked herself in the small office area where the register and security monitors were located. There, on the screens, she saw shadowy figures moving at unnatural speeds through aisles, their features blurred and indistinct, but clearly wearing uniform shirts like hers. The monitors flashed the distorted images alongside unearthly sounds. Muffled cries, anguished wails, and desperate whispers pleading for release and recognition. Suddenly, the door to the office rattled violently. It felt like someone, or something, was trying to get inside. Kara barricaded it with a filing cabinet, trying to steady her breathing. As the pounding on the door escalated, she dialed 911 with trembling hands. The voice on the other end was calm and urgent, assuring her help was on the way. While hiding, Kara noticed through the small office windows a shadowy figure standing just beyond the reach of light. a man covered in dark clothes, unrecognizable but eerily familiar somehow. His eyes gleamed with a sorrow and rage that mirrored the pain bleeding through the walls themselves. Then, inexplicably, the figure vanished, leaving behind a cold stillness and the lingering metallic scent of blood. Paramedics and police arrived to find Kara shaken but unharmed. Upon investigating, they found no signs of forced entry, but traces of blood led to the back alleys behind the store. The man was later apprehended, an ex-employee named Mark, dismissed months before for theft and suspected of harboring a dangerous grudge. His obsession with the store had driven him to obsession and violence. Despite his capture, the store's supernatural phenomena persisted. Employees and managers reported shadows moving in the aisles after hours, the constant reappearance of crimson stains, and an inexplicable atmosphere of tension and sadness that no amount of cleaning could dispel. The walls themselves seemed to whisper the Harrow family's story, a blend of grief, anger, and unresolved justice etched forever into the fabric of the place. Kara, forever changed by the experience, dedicated herself to documenting the haunting and understanding the history that bled through the walls. She worked with local historians and paranormal experts to conduct rites of cleansing and remembrance, hoping to bring peace to the torment trapped inside. While the overt activity lessened, the scars remained, a silent testament to lives broken and memories too painful to fade. The bleeding walls of Pinebridge Dollar Tree became a symbol, not only of horror and tragedy, but of endurance and the human need to confront darkness and seek resolution. Kara's story joined the chorus of voices warning others about the hidden pain lurking in unexpected places. It reminded all who heard it that sometimes, beneath the most mundane facades, lie stories that bleed through time, demanding to be heard. In the outskirts of the small town of Elmwood stood a Dollar Tree store that had long been the subject of unease and whispered rumors. To the outside world, it was just another discount retailer, but to those who worked the night shift, the store was something far darker, a place where the walls seemed to bleed with sorrow and unseen torment. This is the story of one such night, through the eyes of Ethan, a night shift employee whose experience forever changed his understanding of fear and the supernatural. Ethan took the job out of necessity, needing steady income while pursuing his studies. The night shift at the Elmwood Dollar Tree promised quiet hours and a chance to work independently. But from the very beginning, Ethan sensed something unexplainable lurking beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The store felt different after hours, heavier as if weighted down by memories not its own. The usual background hum was sometimes interrupted by strange echoes, distant footsteps, or the faint rustling of unseen movement. The earliest signs were subtle. Ethan noticed reddish stains appearing on walls and ceilings, odd blotches that shimmered unnaturally under the flickering lights. Cleaning attempts only made them darker, as if the building resisted any effort to cover or erase its pain. The metallic odor of iron would linger thickly in the air at odd times, a distressing scent that unsettled Ethan more than he dared admit. As the nights wore on, the strange events escalated. The PA system would crackle to life without warning, emitting faint whispers and distant moans, barely audible but unmistakable to anyone listening closely. Lights flickered unpredictably. Aisles seemed to stretch and warp, as if the store itself was breathing around him. Shadows moved at the corner of Ethan's vision, disappearing when he turned to face them. More chillingly, Ethan began to glimpse figures dressed in the worn, green uniforms of past Dollar Tree employees, ghostly presences, resigned yet restless. Delving into the store's history, Ethan found fragments of a dark past. The property had once been home to a family plagued by tragedy, the Carters, who had been torn apart by greed and violence decades before the store was built. The mother and daughter had died in a mysterious fire, said to be no accident, and their spirits, it was said, lingered bound to the land. Locals whispered that the ground beneath the Dollar Tree was cursed, bleeding with grief and anger that seeped into every brick and board. One particularly harrowing night, Ethan was performing his routine inventory checks when the store plunged into sudden darkness. Emergency lights cast eerie red hues across the aisles. Coldness wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. From the shadowed end of aisle 7, a faint glow emerged. A little girl, translucent and shimmering, her eyes sorrow-filled and pleading. It was the daughter from the old Carter family, trapped eternally between worlds, her presence bleeding through time and space. The haunting intensified with her silent visits, each one carrying a deep sadness that chilled Ethan's bones. He felt the weight of her sorrow, a story of loss and unfinished business that echoed through the store's very walls. At times, invisible hands seemed to brush his skin, cold and desperate. The red stains spread, appearing in new places, the bathrooms, break rooms, and storage closets, like bleeding wounds slowly expanding. The turning point came when an ex-employee with a troubled past returned to the store on a stormy night. Armed and unstable, the man sought out Ethan, his rage fueled by a toxic mix of personal vendetta and the store's dark energy. He terrorized Ethan through the aisles, wielding a gleaming machete in a fury that shook the building's fragile calm. Ethan fled to the employee's office, barricading the door while calling for help with shaking hands. The police arrived just in time to stop the attacker, who was later taken into custody. But the attack was only part of the story. The supernatural presence lingered, the walls continued to bleed with an invisible grief, and the store's air remained thick with sorrow and fear. Other night shift employees reported similar encounters of spectral figures, crying whispers, and the agonizing sense that the store was alive with old pain. Ethan, no longer able to ignore the profound anguish embedded in the place, devoted himself to uncovering the full truth. Working with paranormal experts, local historians, and spiritual advisors, he pieced together the tragic Carter family history. And the rituals attempted to bind restless souls had only linked their torment more tightly to the store's foundation. Together, they performed cleansing ceremonies, prayers, and acts of remembrance aimed at releasing the trapped spirits. With time and effort, the bleeding faded, and the oppressive presence softened. The store's atmosphere lightened, though some remnants of the sorrowful past remained, a quiet reminder of what had been endured. Ethan found peace in the belief that acknowledgement and respect could heal even the deepest wounds, even those etched in walls and spilled through time. The story of the bleeding walls at the Elmwood Dollar Tree is one of tragedy and resilience, a testament to the unseen battles between past and present, spirit and flesh. It stands as a reminder that some places carry scars beyond the visible, and that listening to those silent stories can be both terrifying and redemptive. The Dollar Tree in the quiet town of Fairview had always seemed ordinary enough during the day, a simple place to find affordable goods and stock up on essentials. But by night, the store transformed into an environment thick with unsettling energy and whispered stories. Employees working the late shift spoke in hushed tones of strange occurrences and an almost tangible sorrow bleeding through the very walls of the building. This is the story of one night experienced by Liam, a night shift worker whose encounter forever changed his perception of the place he once thought of as just a job. Liam had started working the graveyard shift at the Fairview Dollar Tree out of necessity. Juggling school and bills, the night shift offered him the quiet and hours he needed to manage both. But from his first night onward, what began as normal work quickly revealed a creeping darkness beneath the fluorescent lights. The air felt heavier, colder, and charged with an invisible weight. It was as if the building itself was mourning something long lost. His first unsettling experience came just days after starting. While restocking aisles, Liam noticed faint streaks on the walls, deep red in color, glistening faintly under the flickering overhead lights. At first, he thought it was just stains or spilled products, but cleaning only made the streaks darken, as if the walls were absorbing the attempts to erase them. The scent of iron lingered heavily in the areas where the stains were worst, an unmistakable and overwhelming odor. Rumors from past employees added layers of dread to Liam's growing unease. They spoke of ghostly figures appearing in the aisles, always dressed in uniforms of past workers frozen in time, their faces marked by sorrow and longing. The phrase "bleeding walls" was whispered, hinting at a pain and loss sewn so deeply into the very bones of the building that it exuded physical manifestations. Liam's nights were haunted by small, inexplicable events. Whispers barely audible through the store's PA system when no one else was around, distant footsteps echoing in empty aisles, and shadows shifting in cornered periphery that vanished the moment he tried to focus on them. Cameras recorded anomalies. Shadows moving independently from any living person, lights flickering in rigid pulses, and cold spots that chilled the air disproportionately. Digging deeper into the store's history during his off hours, Liam uncovered a tragic legacy buried beneath the neon and aisles. The land had once been home to a family named the Graysons. Decades ago, a devastating fire had ripped through their home on this very site. The patriarch, Charles Grayson, was said to have perished trying to save his family. His wife and daughter survived, but the loss and trauma left them scarred in body and spirit. The property was eventually sold and redeveloped, but locals believed the building and grounds carried the grief and unresolved sorrow of the Graysons, a curse that permeated every structure built on their former home. The bleeding walls, Liam realized, were more than just a haunting. They were a physical bleeding of anguish, a residual imprint of a family's heartache that never healed or moved on. The crimson stains bore witness to pain that reached across decades, painted in subtle strokes and seeping out from within the walls. On one night, as the clock ticked past 3 a.m. and Liam made his rounds, the store suddenly plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting deep red hues that reflected eerily on the stained walls. In the dim glow, Liam saw a small, shimmering figure standing silently near the front aisles. A little girl in a faded dress, her eyes filled with unshed tears and a silent plea etched in her expression. It was as if the spirit of the Graysons' lost daughter had returned, trapped in that moment of grief forever bleeding into the present. The figure vanished as he approached, leaving behind the unmistakable scent of smoke and blood intertwined. Liam's heart hammered with a mixture of fear and empathy that would not diminish for days. The haunting's weight pressed heavier on him, the bleeding growing worse and the unseen voices more insistent. The night took a darker turn when the store's haunting attracted a disturbed ex-employee. This man, deeply troubled and obsessed, returned one stormy evening armed with a large knife. His rage seemed fueled not only by past grudges, but by the sorrow embedded in the store's haunted walls. Liam found himself fleeing through the aisles, the man close behind, his footsteps echoing cruelly between the shelves. Liam barricaded himself in the manager's office, locking the heavy door as the attacker pounded and cursed outside. Amid shaking hands, he dialed 911, praying the police would arrive soon enough. The pounding was relentless, like a drum of despair pounding in the heart of the building itself. When help did arrive, the attacker was subdued, though the darkness in the store seemed to linger as if feeding on the chaos. Even as the physical threat was extinguished, the supernatural presence held firm. Employees reported glowing stains reappearing on the walls, the whispering voices returning with renewed urgency, and cold patches that could freeze the breath. The store no longer felt like a mere building, but a vessel of grief, a bleeding wound that refused to close. Determined to bring peace, Liam sought help from paranormal investigators and community historians. Together, they uncovered rituals tied to the Grayson family's sorrow and worked to honor and release the trapped spirits through ceremonies blending tradition and empathy. Slowly, the bleeding began to fade. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the shadows retreated though never fully vanished. The Dollar Tree on Grayson Street had become more than just a place of employment. It was a symbol of endurance, of a pain too deep to remove, but one that could be acknowledged and respected. Liam's story serves as a reminder that sometimes the walls do bleed, not just with blood, but with history, memory, and the undying echoes of loss. In the quiet town of Riverview, nestled between worn streets and fading storefronts, stood a Dollar Tree that seemed like any other at first glance. But those who worked the late-night shifts knew better. This store held shadows that bled beneath its paint and plaster, secrets that whispered long after the last customer had left. The walls of the Riverview Dollar Tree carried a sorrowful weight, bleeding echoes of forgotten pain and restless spirits trapped between aisles stocked with cheap goods. This is the story of Harper, a night shift worker whose encounter with the bleeding walls revealed a dark history intertwined with violence, loss, and the desperate yearning of souls unheard. Harper accepted the graveyard shift to pay bills while attending college, drawn to the solitude the late hours promised. From her first night, a tension hung thick in the air, subtle but relentless. The usual hum of fluorescent lights felt oppressive, charging the store with a heaviness that settled deep into her bones. Strange, cold spots appeared in the shadows, and an unshakable feeling of being watched pressed upon her with every passing hour. At first, she chalked it up to exhaustion and the eeriness of working alone, but soon things escalated. The first glaring sign was the appearance of crimson stains on the walls near the break room and behind the checkout counters. The red marks shimmered faintly, reminiscent of fresh blood, and cleaning them only deepened their stain. Harper noticed the stains pulsing slightly, as if the walls themselves breathed in anguish. The scent of iron hung thick around these spots, a metallic tang mingling with the sterile odor of the store. Local old-timers whispered hushed tales that the land where the Dollar Tree now stood had once been the site of a harrowing tragedy. Decades ago, a brutal crime had shattered a nearby family, the Charleston clan, whose home burned down in suspicious circumstances. 2 children, a boy and a girl, had been lost in the fire, their deaths never fully explained. Since then, the ground seemed cursed, and those tragedies seemed to bleed into every brick and beam erected thereafter. Harper's nights became a vortex of sights and sounds that defied logic. Whispers floated from the dark corners of the aisles, faint voices calling out names she recognized from old newspaper archives. Emily and Jacob Charleston. Shadows flickered in her periphery, sometimes coalescing into fleeting shapes, wearing old-style clothing that no longer belonged in her modern world. The store's security cameras caught strange distortions, moments where the air shimmered and twisted like a heat haze, and dark figures would vanish just as she came into view. One chilling night, Harper was performing the closing routine when the store's power suddenly cut out. Emergency lights bathed the aisles in deep red, casting long, grotesque shadows. A coldness wrapped around her like a shroud. Near the front, a faint, glowing apparition manifested, a small girl with tear-streaked cheeks and tattered clothes. Harper's breath caught as the child's gaze met hers, eyes wide with a silent plea. This was Emily Charleston, trapped in time, bound by grief that seeped through walls and shelves. The apparition remained long enough to guide Harper's intuition toward a long-forgotten storage room hidden behind false walls, one filled with relics and remnants from the past. In the dusty shadows, Harper found a worn doll, scorched photographs, and a faded journal belonging to Emily's mother, Rose. The entries detailed a life of fear and desperation, tales of abuse, mistrust in neighbors, and a fire set not by accident, but by malicious intent aimed at silencing the family. Rose wrote of voices in the night, and the walls bleeding crimson as if crying out for justice. As days turned into weeks, Harper's experience grew darker. The bleeding walls expanded, crimson stains appearing near the break room, the bathroom, and even the office, always accompanied by the scent of iron and whispered cries. The store's PA system sputtered to life unexpectedly at times, playing distorted lullabies intertwined with sobbing. Footsteps echoed on empty floors, growing louder and then vanishing. The tension culminated one terrifying evening when a man broke through the locked entrance. He was a former employee who had been released months before for violent behavior, but now he returned, fueled by rage and obsession. Armed with a sharp blade, he stalked the aisles, shouting threats and curses as if possessed by the very pain embedded in the store's walls. Harper fled and barricaded herself in the back office, desperately calling 911 as the man hammered the door. Officers arrived just in time, restraining the man and ending the physical threat. But the haunting endured, perhaps intensified, suggesting the darkness was tied not only to personal madness, but something older and deeper. Harper learned that the bleeding walls were a manifestation of unresolved harm, layers of grief pressing outward like a wound refusing to heal. The store had become a crossroad for the desperate and lost, a place where memory and suffering mingled indistinguishably. Determined not to be consumed by fear, Harper connected with local historians and paranormal experts, piecing together the Charleston family's tragic story. Together, they held ceremonies to honor the victims, enacting rituals combining prayer, remembrance, and the calling forth of peace to soothe the restless. Over time, the bleeding slowed, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the spectral whispers faded into calming silence. The Dollar Tree in Riverview regained a semblance of normalcy, yet Harper never forgot the weight it carried, an invisible scar etched deep into its walls. The bleeding was no longer visible, but she knew some pains never fully vanish. Instead, they linger, a guardian memory reminding the living to remember, to honor, and to listen. Harper's story is one of resilience, empathy, and the enduring echoes of past tragedies bleeding quietly beneath the surface of everyday places. The walls of the Riverview Dollar Tree tell a tale not just of horror, but of healing, where ghosts seek release and those who dare to see can bring light to the darkest corners. In the quiet town of Ashfield, the Dollar Tree on Maple Avenue was known among its employees as a place where the night seemed to hold its breath, a store where the fluorescent lights flickered even in well-maintained fixtures and shadows clung stubbornly to every corner of the aisles. Rumors of paranormal activity spread quietly through the staff. Whispers of unexplained noises and a feeling of being watched lingered, but the most chilling claim was the one that haunted every night shift worker like a curse. The walls bled, not just in metaphor, but in crimson streaks and stains that appeared and vanished unpredictably, leaving behind the heavy scent of iron and dread. Jackson, a college student working to support his family, had reluctantly taken the late shift to make ends meet. He had heard some of the stories before starting, but dismissed them as urban legend or tired nerves. However, his first night shattered that skepticism. As he walked the aisles, tallying stock, Jackson noticed faint crimson streaks oozing from cracks in the drywall near the back storage area. They glimmered wetly in the harsh overhead lights, spreading slowly as if the walls themselves were bleeding unseen wounds. At first, he thought it could be leaking pipes or spilled cleaning solutions, but there was none of the usual wetness or damage associated, and the stains smelled unmistakably of blood. Attempts to clean these stains with industrial supplies only caused them to darken persistently, as if the building resisted any effort to heal or forget. Jackson's sense of unease deepened with each passing week. He started hearing soft murmurs and distant footsteps echoing through empty aisles when the store was supposed to be deserted. Lights flickered erratically, and the closed-circuit cameras caught fleeting shadows darting across the wide aisles. The back exit door sometimes creaked open by itself, despite being locked tight, releasing gusts of cold air that carried faint, whispering voices. Staff swore they saw moving shapes in uniforms from years past, employees no longer alive, wandering in corners of their vision, vanishing when confronted. Digging deeper, Jackson uncovered a buried history beneath the Dollar Tree's unassuming facade. The land was once the site of a family homestead belonging to the Claremonts, a family torn apart by tragedy nearly a century ago. A devastating fire in the house had claimed the lives of the youngest Claremont children, a boy and a girl whose deaths remained shrouded in mystery and sorrow. Locals passing the now commercialized lot often spoke of an inexplicable heaviness lingering over the ground, a feeling that the earth itself mourned. The bleeding walls, Jackson came to understand, were not just manifestations of the store's haunted past, but rather physical extensions of the anguish imprinted onto the property's bones. The crimson stains pulsed faintly, as if the building itself breathed in grief and exhaled silent, screams trapped in plaster and paint. One night after securing the store, Jackson was restocking near the checkout when the air suddenly chilled. From the shadowed edges, a faint glow coalesced into the shape of a small girl wearing tattered vintage clothing, the spectral form of Claremont's lost daughter. Her eyes, brimming with tears, searched desperately, silently pleading for release or recognition. Jackson felt a wave of sorrow wash over him, as if the girl's pain reached beyond the veil between worlds. As days passed, the haunting grew more intense and personal. The walls bled in new places. The stockroom, the break area, the employee restroom, with the metallic scent growing stronger. The store's PA system occasionally crackled to life, playing distorted lullabies and faint cries. Jackson would hear names whispered in the dead silence, Emily and Thomas, the names tied to the Claremont children. The store's atmosphere became charged with an unshakable dread. Shadows moved on their own accord. Shelves rattled violently, and cold spots caused Jackson to see his breath mist in the sterile air. His dreams became plagued by visions of fire, smoke, and the desperate faces of children calling out to him from behind walls steeped in blood. The climax came one terrifying evening when a man forced his way into the store despite the locked doors. The intruder was a former employee dismissed months earlier for unstable and aggressive behavior. Armed with a large knife, the man stalked the aisles in anguished rage, shouting curses that seemed not just his own, but echoing centuries-old pain bound to the place itself. Jackson managed to barricade himself inside the manager's office, heart pounding as the man pounded on the door and cursed in a voice soaked with fury. Jackson called 911 with trembling hands, the terrifying pounding on the weak door amplifying the building's distress like a drumbeat of despair. Police arrived just in time, restraining the intruder and ending the immediate threat. But even after the arrest, the House of Sorrow did not quiet. The bleeding walls renewed their pulse. The whispers grew insistent, and spectral figures wandered the aisles as if trapped in a loop of grief and rage. Determined not to surrender to fear, Jackson reached out to local historians and paranormal experts to understand and address the dark legacy. Together, through ceremonies blending prayer, remembrance, and cleansing rites, drawn from local traditions and spiritual disciplines, they sought to ease the suffering bound to the walls. Over weeks, the bleeding slowed. The oppressive air lifted. The restless shadows softened and faded. Though the walls no longer bled visibly and the hauntings diminished, Jackson knew the scars remained, silent testaments to the resilience of pain and memory. The Dollar Tree at Maple Avenue was no longer merely a retail store. It was a silent monument to tragedy, a reminder that beneath the surface of the everyday lie stories eager to be told, voices waiting to be heard. Jackson's experience stood as a haunting testament to the fragile line between the living and the lost, and the power of courage and empathy to confront the bleeding walls and the aching souls trapped within. In the quiet, unassuming town of Maplewood, there stood a Dollar Tree store. one that had earned a fearful reputation among former employees and locals alike. Known for strange occurrences and a haunting past, the store was whispered about not for its bargains, but for the eerie and unsettling phenomenon of its walls bleeding, deep crimson stains oozing mysteriously, defying explanation. This is the story of Alex, a night shift worker whose experience at Maplewood's Dollar Tree revealed a darkness far beyond the ordinary, a story etched in pain, madness, and the restless echo of forgotten souls. Alex had taken the graveyard shift on a whim, needing a job that fit with his college schedule. The store appeared ordinary, a typical discount shop, and the quiet night hours seemed ideal at first, but it quickly became clear that something was wrong. From his very first night, he noticed an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to press down on everything inside the store's fluorescent-lit walls. An unnatural heaviness hung in the air, like the building itself mourned a terrible secret no one dared confront. Within days, Alex encountered the first unmistakable sign of the store's haunted nature. Crimson stains appeared sporadically on the walls, thick and wet-looking, sometimes running in slow drips from cracks in the plaster around the back storage and employee break rooms. Cleaning attempts were futile. The stains resisted erasure, deepening in color and seeming to pulse with a dim, sinister life. Alongside the stains came a metallic scent that filled the air. An unmistakable odor of blood, sharp and vivid, that seemed to cling to Alex's clothes and skin long after leaving. The store's history, uncovered by Alex during his restless nights, offered grim context. Decades earlier, the land beneath the Dollar Tree had been the site of a family estate belonging to the Wainwrights. The family was shattered by tragedy, culminating in a fire that claimed the lives of the mother and her 2 children. The father, overwhelmed by grief, disappeared and was never found. Locals still spoke of the events in hushed tones, calling the land cursed, haunted by the anguished spirits of those lost. As the nights passed, Alex found himself deeply affected by an expanding dark presence. Whispers seemed to follow him, faint murmurs caught in the hum of the fluorescent lights, voices that spoke names and pleas just beyond comprehension. Shadows moved suspiciously at the edges of his vision, and sometimes figures appeared, ghostly shapes in faded green uniforms, moving silently through aisles, their faces obscured, but their sorrow palpable. On one particularly harrowing night, Alex was performing an inventory check when the fluorescent lights suddenly flickered and died, plunging the store into semi-darkness. Emergency red lights cast the aisles into eerie crimson. In that dim glow, a small figure materialized near the front, an apparition of a young girl, dressed in damaged, early 20th century clothes, her eyes wide and filled with desperation. Alex recognized her from the Wainwright family portraits he had found in old local archives, the youngest daughter, trapped in a moment of endless pain. The apparition lingered only briefly before vanishing, but her presence lingered like a cold breath on Alex's neck. The bleeding walls grew worse after that night, the stains spreading deeper into parts of the store never before marked. The store's PA system intermittently crackled to life, playing fragmented lullabies and faint, anguished cries. The aisles would suddenly grow deathly silent, save for the sound of slow, agonizing sobbing that seemed to echo from the very walls. The presence of the dead seemed drawn not only to the pain they endured, but to the desperation and sadness that had seeped into the very building. Alex's sleep became plagued by nightmares of fire and loss, visions of the Wainwright family screaming for salvation, trapped behind walls of silence. He awoke each night soaked in sweat, the scent of burning wood and iron heavy in his nostrils. Then the haunting intersected tragically with human malice. One stormy night, a disturbed former employee, dismissed months earlier for erratic and threatening behavior, returned to the Dollar Tree. Fueled by personal vendettas and seemingly possessed by the store's haunting sorrow, he stormed through the aisles armed with a large knife. His rage was terrifying, thunderous footsteps echoing with fury that seemed to shake the very walls. Alex barely escaped, barricading himself in the manager's office and calling 911 with shaking hands. The man pounded incessantly on the door, screams mixing with unintelligible curses worded through a fog of madness. Police arrived in time to subdue him, but the event left a dark stain on the community and deepened the shadow that hung over the store. Even after the immediate threat was contained, the supernatural turmoil continued. Employees reported red stains reappearing, whispers becoming voices, and spectral figures growing more vivid. The store transformed from a place of commerce to a haunted shrine, a bleeding wound etched into everyday life. The walls were a canvas of sorrow and fury blended, ghostly memories refusing to fade. Determined to break the cycle, Alex sought help from local historians, spiritual leaders, and paranormal experts. Together, with ceremonies blending ancient rites and modern spirit-clearing practices, they attempted to honor the Wainwright family and ease their lingering pain. Prayers were recited, artifacts from the family's past were respectfully handled, and spaces consecrated in hopes of releasing the trapped souls. Gradually, the bleeding slowed, and the oppressive atmosphere lightened. The faint whispers softened to quiet peace, and the restless shadows faded into the calm darkness of night. The Dollar Tree of Maplewood ceased to be a place of terror and, instead, became a quiet testament to grief's endurance and the healing power of remembrance. Alex left the store changed, carrying with him its story, a tale of tragedy bleeding beneath the surface of ordinary life, of ghosts bound by agony and the courage of the living to face and honor them. The bleeding walls told a story of pain, loss, and ultimately, hope that even the deepest wounds might one day find peace.